My name is John Spinney. I work for the Agency of Education in Vermont, and I'm in my 20th year. And we're going to go through some history on this one because this is outside of IDEA. This is a Vermont-specific thing that we're going to be discussing. And again, I'm recording this, so we're going to have this up on the website. So if you have some colleagues that would benefit from it, please feel free to share that with them. And of course, everybody who's registered, I'll send out a copy of the PowerPoint after the training. And this is the live version of PowerPoint, and there are lots of links that we're going to go through, and you should be able to click those links. And I would encourage you to click on those when they pop up, because you're not going to be able to, like, once I go to the next slide, you won't be able to grab that link until you get the PowerPoint later. So, feel free to pull those up as we're going through the training. Just quickly checking. All right, so we are gonna, oh, by the way, there's a post-training survey and that you can do at the end, and then that survey will email you a certificate of attendance. Okay, so some background. For folks that have been around in Vermont for a while in the special ed world, you probably remember the multi-year plan. It was also referred to as the alternative credit accrual plan. So this is how we as a state, for many, many years, had one diploma for all students, okay, in a credit-bearing system that used seat time to determine credits for graduation. Okay, so this was something that lived in the supplemental rules to special education. And, due to the nature of that student's disability, if they were not able to meet one of the courses that were required for graduation, like let's say Algebra 1, and due to the nature of that student's disability, even with extensive modifications, if they were not going to be able to really access that course meaningfully, then they could take a parallel course, like a life skills math course, and get the same credit that they would with Algebra 1. And the multi-year plan had a template, and I'm going to show a little snapshot of it. Many of you are probably familiar with this. And that template, that document, basically, it says what's the credit, what's the required course for graduation, and what's going to be the alternative course that student is going to do. So the whole thing was sort of in the spirit of accessibility, but in a much more crude way, not as individualized and I would say as authentic as the new system that we have now, just because of the nature of credit. So, again, this was not part of IDEA, this entire training. So if you've come to my last few trainings, we've talked about the transition plan and the IEP, right? That's federal. IDEA. It's something that all states comply with. This whole thing, the multi-year plan, as well as the PBGR access plan, are Vermont specific and were created by us. And the process is evolving, as you're going to see. There's already some changes that we needed to make. And it's probably going to keep happening, especially as if we do what the governor is suggesting with switching to 5 districts, there's probably going to be some changes to this down the road. I don't know, so I shouldn't even really speak to that. But again, this is a process that's probably going to evolve over time. So we're still talking about the multi-year plan. This is how we've historically had one diploma for all students. We are not one of those states that has a separate special education diploma, and we don't ever want to be one of those states, just saying. So this is kind of what it looks like. So he's got the student name and what school year and the grade level and the required graduation course credit, and details as to why the student cannot master those requirements, and then the alternative course. So like Algebra 1 might, as an example, might sit there on that graduation column, and then the alternative course might be a life skills math, just a basic example. And again, we've used that system for many, many years. And high schools that are still using credits are most likely still using this because that's all they have access to. You can't do a PBGR access plan if your high school is still using credits for graduation. By the way, I just want to point out, if you have questions along the way here, just throw them in the chat, and I'm going to go through those at the end of the training. All right, we're still going through some history here. So the Vermont Education Quality Standards, which was first released in 2014, it called for a shift away from credits/seat time to proficiencies in terms of determining graduation for students. Prior to 2014, a team of folks from we used to be a Department of Education back then, the then DOE Special Education team, we created updated language for the graduation requirements that called for proficiency-based graduation by 2020. And that's what the EQS had said at the time, that, this was well ahead, 6 years ahead of the 2020 requirement. And we're starting to put this together. And our concern initially was that somehow the right way, we could be in a situation where we now have this separate special education diploma, and we just really wanted to avoid that. And our team spent a lot of time going through and drafting the language that is in the education quality standards, and I'm going to show you what we wrote. And we wanted to, of course, make sure that we remain a state that does one diploma for all students. So let's go to the next. So now you can click that link, okay? And those are the current education quality standards. This section is the same as it was back in 2014 when we had first created that language. And I have 2 slides of this because it's kind of a long requirement, and I do have the link on both slides. So if you don't grab it right now, the next slide has it as well. A student meets the requirements for graduation when the student demonstrates proficiency in the learning content outlined in 2120.6 and completes any other requirements specified by the board of the school district attended by the student. For students eligible for special ed services under IDEA or protected by Section 504 of the Rehab Act, the student shall meet the same graduation requirements as typical peers in an accommodated or modified manner. The highlighted section is really the key here. These modifications will be documented in each student's personalized learning plan. A student's IEP team or 504 team is responsible for assuring that information regarding the student's individual skills, aptitudes, and present levels of performance are incorporated into the student's personalized learning plan. This ensures that the required proficiency levels are linked to local graduation requirements, individually accommodated or modified as required for the student, and are written into the student's personalized learning plan. This process shall ensure that any student identified as a student with a disability will receive a regular high school diploma after meeting their individual graduation requirements as outlined in their PLP. So, of course, this was written before the PBGR access plan was released. So what we're recommending as far as where you write all this stuff, you certainly can put it into the PLP if your student has one, or you can document it in the PBGR access plan, which we'll get to that. Now, normally I keep going, but it seems like there's a lot of questions. So I'm just gonna take a look here. What if your school utilizes proficiency scores to assign a credit? That is, I don't have an answer for that one right now. I try to come back to that. The problem is there are a ton of different ways that high schools are doing this right now. And it's very difficult at AOE for us to be supporting folks because you got one high school over here is using credits You have another high school over here that's using PBGRs associated with individual courses. And then you have some high schools that have school-wide proficiency-based graduation requirements set up using learning scales. And those are incredible. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show examples. Did you say if the high school uses credits, then we do not do a PBGR? We do multi-year plan instead. That is us too. If you're using credits, there's no way for you to do a PBGR access plan because that access plan is based on the proficiency-based graduation requirements tied to the Common Core. Multi-year plan is based on credits. So if you're still using credits, I mean, the recommendation from AOE is that, you know, we want to get you using the PBGRs, and then we have a whole entire team at AOE that can help you get set up. And in fact, the AOE helped create the learning scale system that we're going to show. And it looks like Emily Lute, who is a colleague at AOE from our one of our divisions that is involved with this work. Emily, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and go ahead?
Sure. Hi, I'm Emily Loita. I'm the English Language Arts and Literacy Specialist, and I work on the proficiency-based learning team. And so I think the challenge here is that in EQS, it is required that schools are graduating students with proficiency-based graduation requirements, but it also allows that to be locally developed and can be tied to credits and may not be. So there are a lot of mixed systems out there. And what it sounds like to me is that that multi-year plan was back when it was simply credits. But now that we have PBGRs, even those that are tied to credits, you can still use the access plan if your credits are connected to the PBGRs and you base it on the PBGRs. And then, as John was saying, there are some other options. So I'm going to turn it back to him. I'm just trying to provide a little clarity.
Thanks, Emily. And for those of you that are at a high school that has not set up your PBGRs, Emily is going to be one of the staff that potentially is going to be could be working with you and providing technical assistance. This is outside of my area. My sort of entry point here is really the access and helping you folks think through things in terms of the graduation requirements and making them accessible. Whereas Emily's team is really going to be working with your whole entire school potentially in terms of the school-wide system for proficiency-based graduation requirements. Okay, so the class of 2020 was the first class to graduate using a proficiency-based graduation system, okay? And I'd say in about 2018 or so, which again was after the EQS came out, Karen Edwards, who is the special ed director, our state special ed director at AOE. Well, I forget exactly what year. Efficiencies, we need to create a new system because the multi-year plan will become obsolete. The multi-year plan was based on credits, and it is not going to work with a proficiency-based system. And she tasked me with creating a new system. And so I was kind of like looking at what other states were doing, and no one was doing anything like this. And I reached out to the I team, and basically we contracted with the I team and CDCI, and we created it together with them. So let me just make sure. During that time, so prior to 2020, the AOE and the division and the team that Emily is on spent a lot of time creating model PBGRs that schools can just adopt. And there were quite a few schools who took that offer and that opportunity to do that. And then there was quite a few schools who did not do anything and just stayed with their credits and are still using credits. It's not like it's not a monitored type compliance type thing right now anyway. I don't know if that will change, but so anyway, there is a lot of work that AOE has done to make things easier on high schools to do this shift to PBGRs. So the creation of the PBGR access plan. So we contracted with Vermont CDCI, and it was Maureen Nevers was the person I worked with, and basically Maureen and I created the PBGR access plan, and she was amazing, and she's a really good person to talk to when you are looking at how to make modifications, or how does somebody's disability impact their learning, and how can you best address that in terms of creating learning and growth for that student. She's really great. So during that time, back then, as a state, we were using the dynamic learning maps for our statewide alternate assessment. And we decided to use the essential elements for this as well, because those were directly tied to the Common Core standards. And all of the PBGRs, like all of the model PBGRs that AOE made, as well as even the ones that were high schools were creating even separate from AOE, they all were tied to the Common Core. So by us using those essential elements, what that did was you can pull up a Common Core standard and then go find the essential element for it. And it's just sort of that core central part of that Common Core standard. It can allow you to make a modification and scaffold it down. And so the essential elements identified and pulled out, like I said, the essential component of a given Common Core standard, and then allows for that modification. All right, so let's just take a look at the access plan. This is from 2019, and again, there are some changes that make sense here, and this process is probably going to evolve over time. So I'm going to just click this, and it's going to bring, so I welcome you to pull this up on your own if you want, or you can see my screen. So this is a fictional student named Kevin. And the areas I just kind of want to focus your attention on, and just remember, this is replacing the multi-year plan. This is not for every student. This is for students that have typically intensive needs and have difficulty accessing the graduation requirements. So it's not going to be something that all of your students are going to need. So
John, I don't think you're sharing the sample plan. I'm just seeing the slide deck.
I see what you're saying. So I think I just need to, well, I don't really want to stop presenting that. I would, if folks can, click that link and open it yourself, and we're going to have to walk through. I think if I cancel this, it's gonna be hard to get back into this live PowerPoint. So please click that link for the sample PBGR access plan, and scroll down to where it says the student name, Kevin, IEP meeting date, 8/27/2019. I don't know, maybe I should just stop sharing this. All right, I'm gonna go the old school analog way. Okay, do you see my screen now? Okay. So I'm not going to go totally through this entire thing, but mostly just want to orient you to, you see where the PBGR is a speaking and listening PBGR. So initiate and participate effectively in a range of discussions, responding thoughtfully to diverse perspectives and expressing ideas clearly and persuasively. And the performance indicator that requires modifications: respond thoughtfully to diverse perspectives, synthesize comments, claims, and evidence made on all sides of an issue, resolve contradictions when possible, and determine what additional information or research is required to deepen the investigation or complete the task. So the way this was set up, of course, is using the essential elements, which we're going to talk about that. We're going to be pivoting away from those to something else. But so engaging in collaborative discussions, prepare for discussions by collecting information on the topic, work with peers to set rules and goals for discussions, ask and answer questions to verify or clarify ideas and understandings during a discussion, respond to agreements and disagreements. It lists out the skills. It lists out modifications to the performance indicator. And then there's a statement. How will you know if the student met the performance indicator? Performance will be measured by the quantity, diversity, and relevance of Kevin's contribution to the group discussion. And that is how Kevin is going to show that he met this PBGR. Okay. Now we're not going to be able, let me come back to the live version. Emily, do you want to ask your question? I think you have your hand up.
Hi, sorry, I'm not sure if this is the right time, but so if you have a student that's like in an English class, but is intensive needs, like you might be creating several PBGR plans for that student for that one class, correct? Because do you know what I mean?
I would say, because I'm going to touch on a lot of stuff that's relevant to what you just asked, can we hold off on that? Because
Absolutely.
there's just a lot of layers here. And the really, really difficult thing for AOE is the sheer differences of how different every high school is doing these things. So it's difficult for us to provide TA. So I would say if you could write that into the chat, that would be great, because we're going to go through some things that are going to hopefully make some more sense. Okay, recent changes needed. So we shifted away from using the dynamic learning maps, and we are now using the multi-state alternate assessment system. That system uses something called the core content connectors. And those core content connectors are basically the same thing as the essential elements. And we just, I guess initially when this was all created, we decided to keep it kind of aligned with our state's alternate assessment, even though that's an entirely different thing. The essential elements and the core content connectors are basically how we can modify those performance indicators. So the CCCs are the same thing as the essential elements. And you can click on these. I'm just wondering if I want to, so if I click this. So I would encourage you to just click that link and scroll down to really any of these, especially writing. I kind of was using some writing examples.
John, this is Erica. I'm sorry to interrupt. There are two links here. I've clicked on both, but when you're saying click on that link and scroll down, which of the two are you referring to?
Okay, do you see my screen now? Okay, so this is sort of the overarching page.
Yes, and it looks like that's the one that has like a tube with a light, whatever, and you can scroll down to that point.
And then I clicked the literary page. And now I'm going to go to grade 9 and 10. And so what you have here are, on the far right side is the Common Core Standard. This is where your PBGR might live. You know, if your high school already has PBGRs, this is where if you have to do an access plan, you would kind of try to find that Common Core Standard. And then you can look at over here the core content connector, the CCC, which is going to allow you to create a different entry point or a modified performance indicator. All right. This is just getting confusing with how many windows I have going here. All right, let's get back to the PowerPoint. I think I'm still sharing my screen. Sorry, folks, this is a little bit different than how I usually do it. Okay. So again, the CCCs are how you are going to be taking those Common Core standards and how you're going to scaffold them down. Keep in mind, all of this is actually relatively avoidable if your high school sets up proficiency-based graduation requirements using learning scales. And we're going to get to that. And I know this is kind of somewhat of a confusing process, and it is confusing. And we've trying to make it less confusing. So this is that page I was showing that has all of the CCCs for math and language arts. And that's where you could go. You look at your PBGRs, you figure out which Common Core standard it's talking about. And again, it's the proficiency-based graduation requirement that your student is not able to access. You don't have to do this for every graduation requirement unless the student can, is not going to be able to access it. It's specifically focused on which ones the student is not going to be able to access. So this is, the same slide we were just looking at, and then it does it for science as well. Okay. This is where, we really are seeing a wide variety of how it's playing out in high schools, but this is based on the AOE guidance. The PBGR should be overarching, representative of the school, and accessible to all students. It is essential that PBGRs and expectations for proficiency are transparent and readily available to students, families, and community members. Setting up PBGRs within courses versus school-wide presents an equity and access issue. So what happens when a student can't access the PBGR, which is required for graduation, because they can't get access to that class? So that's why the guidance has been to make your PBGR school-wide. Okay, now on this link, hopefully you can someone just chime in? Are you folks able to still click links in the PowerPoint?
No.
No, John. That stopped when you
Okay.
came back this last time.
Let's come back to that. Okay.
Now we can.
Okay, great. So the links that you have up, I would recommend you open all 4 of those links before we lose this slide. The first link is a huge web page that AOE has lots and lots of guidance on PBGRs. The second link is specifically around these proficiency scales. And I've been kind of blown away by the proficiency scales, because what they do is they take all this stuff, just talk the Common Core standard, you extract that core content, and now these scales have a rubric. So you have sort of this beginning side, and then you have the proficient side. And so you have this range now that the IEP team can identify the level that student needs to meet to reach graduation. And this is the kind of system that AOE can help your high school set up. And I'm going to pull up, so these 2 links, I'm going to first pull up Central Vermont Learning
John,
Scales.
that's FYI for me. I couldn't click that link. It's just a box of text that you can't click on. The Missisquoi Valley, I clicked, but the Central Vermont just shows me a box of text.
All right, well, let's try it.
Yeah, it's
You
working
know.
for me, John. The Central Vermont, it's working.
Okay, good.
Then it's just me. Good.
I'm gonna click this and open it, and then I'm gonna go back to sharing in the other way here so that we can follow along better. I'm gonna stop sharing that, and then we're gonna share. Okay, so this is what Central Vermont Supervisory Union created. And I'm a huge fan of this. And again, AOE helped them with this. And so they have, these are school-wide PBGRs for grades 9 through 12. And I'm going to just focus on the writing one just because it gives us one sort of thing to hone in on for these different examples. So I'm going to click on the narrative writing. And here you have these proficiency scales. This is really cool. So over here is the Common Core standard. Sorry, right above here is the Common Core standard, and then this is the performance indicator. This is basically the scaffolded down core aspect of that performance indicator. So someone who's at a high school that is using these, and let's say the student is not going to be able to access this performance indicator as it is, but maybe they can access this right here. And if this beginning level needs to be modified down, that's where you could modify it further with the core content connectors. But if you have this system set up, it's for most of your kids, it's going to be easier, and you might find that you're not going to need to do a PBGR access plan in some of these cases. So what you would do is like, you might just, sorry, I should say, you still need to kind of document like, well, what level does a student need to reach to meet graduation? And you are allowed to make modifications to the performance indicator. And that's essentially what is happening here. If you're saying, hey, our student is going to use the beginning level, that is going to be the target for graduation for that particular student. You want to document it either in the PLP or the PBGR access plan. So let's just look at, let's see if let's look at a different writing one. So this is write informative explanatory texts to examine and convey complex ideas and information clearly and accurately through effective selection, organization, and analysis of content. Which is, so this is this is what's tied to the Common Core standard over here on the far left. And then this is the beginning level. And then you go all the way through exemplary. And so I just wanted to make sure folks saw this, because we're seeing quite an array of different ways that high schools are doing PBGRs. And I'm also going to, I want to show, let's go to the MVU one real quick. Okay, so I'm in the Missisquoi Valley High School PBGRs, and they have these learning skills as well. So here is the Common Core standard, and here is the rubric. And so this is giving you a way of making sure that your kids can access the graduation requirements. And I just love how they have done this. And again, AOE can help set this up if your high school is interested in doing this. Okay, so let's come back. PowerPoint. Okay. All right, so I have a few slides here that I'm trying to address the different scenarios that we're seeing in the field. So for high schools that are using a school-wide PBGR learning scale system, like what we just looked at for Central Vermont and for MVU, like I said, IEP teams may find that they don't need to do an access plan in terms of like taking the Common Core standard and doing the CCC's process and then kind of creating a new performance indicator, because that's already kind of been done with the way the learning scales get created. However, you still need to kind of identify what level that your student needs to reach in order to meet the graduation requirement. And you can use that PBGR access plan to document that, or the PLP, right? Just like the EQS states. Now, what I've sort of learned over the years is that I've had high schools tell me that their kids with intensive needs don't get PLPs, and that is concerning. And if your students with intensive needs who are a candidate for this process, if they don't have a PLP, then I would say put it into, document this in the PBGR access plan, the levels that they need to hit for those PBGRs that they can't access on their own due to the nature of their disability. So if the IEP team determines that the beginning level of that PBGR learning scale is still at a level that the student cannot access, then the team could create some further modifications using those core content connectors. Okay, this is a different scenario now. For high schools using PBGRs that are associated with individual courses, IEP teams will likely find they need to use the Common Core connectors to make modifications to the performance indicators for those course-specific PBGRs. Vermont AOE highly recommends schools shift to using school-wide PBGRs that are accessible for all students. If you would like to get that process started, please email Pat Fitzsimmons at AOE, and her email is right there. For high schools using school-wide PBGRs without learning scales, you may find that you still need to do an access plan to pull out that core aspect of the standard and make a updated, modified performance indicator. For high schools still using credits, then IEP teams will need to utilize the multi-year plan template, just because that's all you can do really if you don't have proficiency set up yet. And again, if your school wants to make this switch, please reach out to Pat Fitzsimmons. Okay, now here's sort of the steps. Tried to sort of simplify this a bit. So step one is identify your high school PBGRs. If your school is using the PBGR learning scale system, then identify what level the student needs to reach for graduation for each required area that the student cannot access. Again, this whole thing is to document where you have to make some modifications. If the student can access the PBGR as it's written, then you don't need to have that included here. Okay, so document in the student's PLP or the PBGR access plan. For schools without the learning scales, continue to the next step. So step two, identify what Common Core standards are associated with each PBGR that the student cannot access. And then identify the CCCs for each Common Core standard tied to those PBGRs. And then use the CCCs to rewrite the performance indicator for a given high school PBGR. Repeat for each PBGR that the student cannot access. And then document in the PLP or the PBGR access plan. So as you can probably see, I mean, if your school takes the time to go through and set up these PBGR learning scales, it's going to make things a lot easier for you, for your students with intensive needs in terms of accessing the grad requirements, because it's not going to be as complicated when it comes time to identifying, well, what levels does the student need to reach? How is the student accessing these grad requirements? The learning scale system is really great. So here's an example of the current template. Now, by the way, the template is going to need to be updated, of course, because it's still referencing the essential elements. And like I said, this process is probably going to evolve a bit. And so if we do an updated template, of course, that will get released. You'll get we would put it out into the weekly field memo. We put it out to the special ed director listserv. We would get it up on the website, but it's a little small. I don't know if people can see it okay. So this is a fictional student, Stephen Sugar Ray. So you have the PBGR at the top, right? Write out the PBGR description here. So produce clear and coherent writing for a range of tasks, purposes, and audiences. And the performance indicator that requires modification. Produce clear and coherent writing in which the development, organization, style, and register are appropriate to task, purpose, and audience. For example, or that is arguments, informative, explanatory text, and or narratives. And then it has the Common Core standard references. So it says essential elements, but we're using the core content connectors now. Produce writing to complete a task or communicate an idea or information. And the skills are around communication and task completion. The modified performance indicator would be produce writing to complete a task or communicate an idea or information. How will you know if the student met the performance indicator? Stephen will be able to produce writing to complete a task or communicate an idea or information when prompted prior to graduation. All right, next slide. This is just a basic reminder to use the graduation readiness tool, which does mention the, access to the graduation requirements. This is something you want to start using for your students who are on IEPs starting in 9th grade. All right, now let's go through the questions. I know we got some meaty questions here. So I'm going to back up. Okay, so from Brian. So we have 10 domains with 3 to 5 proficiencies, each of which can have multiple performance indicators. For a student with pervasive disability, is the thought that we will complete this form for every performance indicator? That's like 100 forms for one student. And it looks like, did Emily? Okay, this is why we really are encouraging high schools to make that shift to using those proficiency scales and having those school-wide proficiencies, because in this case, Brian, that you mentioned, it's just too much. You can't be expected to do that. That's like 100 forms for one student. We don't want that, right? It's going to be too much. So, we have to think about, well, what is the most effective, streamlined way to make these graduation requirements accessible for your students? And our guidance is that it starts with those PBGR proficiency scales. And if you set that up for your entire school, it's going to make those entry points for your kids a lot easier. And then you're not going to need to do a complicated access plan entry for each of those indicators, because a lot of it has already been done. And then now all you have to do is identify the level that the student needs to reach. Next question. I think my team's proficiency scales that John is going to talk could help with that. Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Those scales are excellent. Okay, from Julie, essential elements are linked to the Common Core. Is there a document that lists all the essential elements we can use as a resource? So that is with the Julie, that's with the CCCs. So let me go back to that slide. So
yeah,
if you grab,
I think it was, you answered it with the slides.
Oh, okay. Yeah, save these 2 links. These have all the CCCs for everything. Now, when we were doing, oh, I'm not sharing. No, I am.
No, we'll have access to the slideshow right after the.
Yeah, I'm going to email everybody the PowerPoint as well. All right, I'm confused if the essential elements are the same as CCC. Why was there a switch? Okay, Shannon, I'll try to explain it. because it's a little confusing. So we decided to use these essential elements because that's what we had access to at the time, when we first created the access plan. And the other thing to that is that when I was trying to pull together the essential elements for English, language arts, math, science, they were kind of all over the place. It was hard to get a copy of everything directly from dynamic learning maps. And so what I ended up having was all these PDFs from different states. And so they had the essential elements. I had like, it was just a little bit confusing to do it that way. And when Vermont switched to that new alternate assessment that we're using, and I learned about these core content connectors, I just felt it made sense to make the switch to using the CCCs, because as a state, we're already using them with our alternate assessment, and they're just easier to access. They're easier to find. Everything's online. So some of it was just like a rationale of just like, it's easier to get our hands on these different CCCs than it is with the essential elements. However, there's nothing in the rules that say you have to use the CCCs versus the essential elements. If you would like to use the essential elements, there's nothing wrong with that. The main thing is that you're pulling out the core aspect of that Common Core standard, and you're making a modified performance indicator. So you can certainly use the essential elements instead of the CCCs if you would like to. I've just found it's easier to find these CCCs, and they're just organized easily, and they're all online. Okay, Jean Shea, I want to check in again on this idea of PBGR access plan and multi-year plans. If we reference EQS from July of 25, the language states schools may or may not use credits for the purpose of demonstrating that a student has met the graduation requirements. So I am aware of a number of high schools that still do this as allowed, since credits are outlined and attached to the proficiencies. So in this case, would these schools, would they still be completing multi-year plans? So Emily had kind of touched on that a little bit before, but basically, I think you're still going to need, because those credits are tied to those proficiencies, you're still going to probably need to do an access plan if those PBGRs are, not at the level the student can access. So I guess it comes down to the question of accessibility. So even though I understand you're associating the credits with those PBGRs, just focus on the PBGR aspect and determine the complexity of those. And is your student going to be able to meet those as they're written? And if not, then use the access plan to scaffold those down. Use the CCCs or the essential elements, if you'd like, to make those modified performance indicators. And then when they meet that, then they're going to get the credit that you've associated with that PBGR. From Shannon, I get the idea of modifying the PBGRs as needed for a range of students. Do you ever recommend scale down the number of PBGRs for a student? Emily, do you want to chime in on that? Because I know your team has made those priority performance indicators. Emily?
Yeah, I'm not sure about, I guess it depends on what the student can access, but we have scaled down the number of PBGRs in our state models by prioritizing standards and creating priority performance indicators. So there are much fewer, and my recommendation would be to try to have your student meet them all, but at a level that is appropriate for where they can access it. So, in that beginning or developing part of the scale, if proficient is not realistic.
Thank you. Okay, from Erica, thanks for dropping it in the chat. Okay, great. Okay, Heather Willis-Doxey, are there any guidelines for which students would qualify for a PBGR access plan? Heather, it's really going to be more up to the IEP team in terms of looking at the required PBGRs for graduation. And, you know, if the student cannot access it as is, then you're likely going to need to do some work with the access plan. So we didn't want to kind of just say it's only for this disability or only for this disability. It's really an IEP team decision, basically. Okay, from Jennifer, would a PBGR access plan be possible for students with significant emotional and behavioral disabilities? And the answer is yes, if that student is not going to be able to access those PBGRs as they're written due to their disability. So again, that's an IEP team decision to talk through that and think through that one. From Brian. Certainly. Okay, he's talking to Jennifer. If the disability significantly impacts skill attainment, the type of disability doesn't matter. Exactly. In practice, this would be more common for intellectual and spectrum disorders, but EBD is certainly possible. I 100% agree with what Brian said there. From Heather, has this work been done with the model PBGR scales on the AOE website where they are aligned to the CCCs? So that might be a good, okay, Heather, Emily answered this. Hi, Heather, our team doesn't work with CCCs, so we have not done this, but both are highly based on the Common Core. So I would imagine they are aligned. Yeah, Heather, the way that those proficiency scales have been set up, even though they're not directly using those CCCs, it's still like it's been modified down to that beginning column. And that's going to make it, I think, easier for IEP teams to determine the identified level for that student to meet graduation and then have it documented. From Jennifer, we have learning scale progressions at my school. Instead of the access plan, could I write something in the accommodations that say student will meet graduation requirements at the emerging level? Yeah, I mean, as far as where it, you know, it gets documented, I mean, the EQS is saying to document it in the PLP. You know, we're also saying you can document it in the access plan, but that's probably a local decision, you know, at your high school if you want to have it documented somewhere else. And it's probably not an accommodation though. In most cases that this is there's a modification to the performance indicator. So I think the key is just having a place where everybody at your high school knows where this is documented and it's clear what level that student needs to meet graduation. Okay, Linda mentioned Amanda is the new alternate assessment coordinator. From Jean. Got it, thanks. That makes sense. Okay. From Linda. DLM has essential elements which are proprietary, therefore blocked once the contract ends with the vendor. Okay. So our new multi-state alternate assessment uses the core content connectors, and we have access because those are aligned with our current alternate assessment. If you have a standard that is not in one of those, I think we may still have the Vermont AA alternate achievement standards. Those are owned by Vermont, but we switched vendors, so it is better to use the CCCs. And Amanda Haas, who is on our special ed team, can help you as well with that. As far as if you have questions about the CCCs or if you have questions about the alternate assessment in general. Okay, from Chris. So if the IEP team decides that a student can meet the PBGR at a level 2 instead of the 2.5 the school requires for graduation, would you do a PBGR access plan? Yes, Chris. From Jennifer, would it be okay to also note access plan in the present levels and goal areas? Certainly. Yep. I think that's all the questions. Now we are way ahead of time here. What other questions do folks have? Or discussion items or?
Hey, John.
Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
It's Erica again. You kind of dropped it and then moved quickly, which is fine because that's not what this is about. But I wanted to confirm because I've kind of been looking out for it. The Lord, now I've got too many tabs open. The what you dropped for the graduation readiness tool. That is the new one that we should be using because I've been kind of on the lookout for it and hadn't seen it yet. But when you said that, I was like, oh, cool. But I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, that's
it looks like the new one, and that's okay to use now.
And
okay.
I'll pull it back up, Erica here.
I'm sure I have it here somewhere. I just when you open way too many
oh yeah.
tabs.
So there's the link to the new graduation readiness tool. So save that. We also there's a recorded training on it.
Yeah, I got
all the special educators. Yep, that's the new edition of the tool.
Okay, great. That's what I just wanted to confirm. It looked like it, and I was on a recording on a PD where you mentioned it before, so I've kind of been looking out for it. And like I said, you just kind of dropped it and kept going, and I wanted to confirm. That's awesome. I will get that out to my folk ASAP.
Okay. Oh, good, great. All right, we've got a couple more questions from Shannon. Clarifying question: if we have both PBGRs and credits, we can choose PBGR or multi-year plan. Well, my guess is it's kind of like that example we were talking about a few minutes ago where you have PBGRs, but you've associated credits with those. So I would probably defer that you're going to still need to use the PBGR access plan because you're probably going to need, depending on the student and the disability, you're probably going to need to make some modifications to those PBGRs. And then once they meet that, you determine the level they need to meet, then they would get that credit that is associated with that proficiency. And again, I know this whole thing is a little confusing, and I think, especially if as a state, if we move to 5 districts, I feel like some of this is going to change again or get streamlined. But I'm assuming and hoping that we would certainly keep those proficiency scales. Those PBGR scales are really excellent. And so strongly encouraging all the high schools to get those set up, and AOE can help you with that. Okay. Thanks, Erica. And Emily's put her email here as well in the chat if you would like to reach out to Emily at AOE. I'm going to put the link to the post-training survey is up on the screen. Oops, sorry. So if you click that, that's going to give you a quick survey. And when you're done with the survey, it will email you a certificate. Oh, thanks, Catherine. Catherine Rossman, also from AOE here, covers the science content area at AOE. So feel free to reach out to her as well. So please grab this survey, and I'm going to also put it in the chat when I stop sharing. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And thanks for coming. So please do the survey. If you didn't grab it on the screen, I'm going to put it in the chat right now. From Emily, who do you reach out to for help if you are an independent school that works with many sending schools? Well, I would start with Pat Fitzsimmons, and then she can, if she's not going to be the one to help you, she can kind of get you connected, Emily. And I will put Pat's email in the chat as well.